welcome to the Stronger Than My Excuses show. I'm Claire Braund, co-founder and executive director of Women on Boards, and your host for today's discussion on women in leadership. We're joining you today from the Foundry Co-work at Erina on the New South Wales Central Coast, and thank them for supporting this show. Before we go into the panel discussion, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Darking young people, and pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and to anyone joining us today of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander descent. Over the coming months, Stronger Than My Excuses is going to be producing a range of programs on topical issues impacting business and community, so make sure you look out for those. Today, however, we're going to be talking about the roadmap for women aspiring to board and leadership roles. It's now time to introduce co-host for today's program, Barbara Ketley from web design and digital marketing agency Milestone Bellanova. Good morning and welcome, Barbara.
Thank you, Claire. It's great to be here. Well, our aim today is to find out what steps women can take to move up to the next leadership role, the pathway for this and some of the issues surrounding this. We have with us today a great panel lined up to help us, and we'll be leaving you with some actionable takeaways.
Barbara, do you want to introduce our guest to us?
I'd love to, Claire. We have on our panel today, I'd like to introduce Amy Osborne, who is the Regional Advisor for the Institute of Managers and Leaders. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you.
We have Paula Martin, the Regional Director for Business New South Wales Central Coast. Welcome, Paula. And we have Melissa Marshall, Business Owner of Sinorama Tuggerah and finalist for the Business Person of the Year in the Central Coast Business Awards. Congratulations, Melissa. Welcome to the show, everyone. Well, before we ask the first question, I would like to introduce and thank our sponsors, and in particular, our primary sponsor, Women on Boards. We couldn't do this without you.
Thank you, Barbara. It's a pleasure for us to be involved in a program supporting women in leadership. Remember, there are no more excuses. Right now, we're going to turn to our panel who are going to share their expertise and wisdom and knowledge and their stories with us, and they're going to leave us with some great tools for action. If you've got any questions, please post them onto any of the Stronger Than My Excuses social media, and we will endeavour to get to them as quickly as possible. First up, we're going to tackle the issues impacting women aspiring to board and leadership roles. Over the last years, the number of women on boards has been trending steadily upwards, yet the story is not the same for women in C-suite and CEO roles. Why are there so few women at the tops of our listed and private companies or as the heads of state and federal government departments? Yet women are really doing heavy lifting when it comes to business and local community. So Barbara, you've got some experience with this. I'm going to ask you to take this one first.
Okay. Well, we are, of course, still living in a patriarchal society where the majority of managers and leaders are men, and most of the men have been brought up to have a sense of entitlement, to have to hold these positions of power, whereas women traditionally have been brought up to be facilitators and nurturers. So when a woman wishes to take a key leadership role, there are often very few role models or mentors further up the hierarchy to assist her. And it is unfortunately a fact that people tend to promote people who resemble them. So for a male rising through the ranks, they often have the support of a lot of male mentors and advisors. But for a woman, very often there are very few female leaders, so she has to do it on her own. And I think this is even more important, unfortunately, since the Me Too movement, because a study showed that 60% of men were now reluctant to mentor or even meet with a woman on her own. And we all know that for anybody, having a mentor is a really important facet in career development. So if women are to rise without a mentor, it's a much tougher journey for them.
Mm-hmm. So true. You can't be what you can't see. Paula.
It's really interesting that you talk about mentor as a really critical factor for the success of women rising in an organisation. I'd also like to add that there are some other elements that are needed for women to succeed in the workplace, whether it be to run their own business or to simply escalate in a corporate organisation. And that is that we need to really address this concept of mindset. So what we're looking at in workforces is beyond looking at mentoring. It's important that we look at the whole way we train and recognise what leadership of the future is. And that means understanding how women respond to growth and women respond to promotion versus how men respond to growth and men respond to promotion. So again, I've been reading a lot of studies. McKinsey released a study recently where they showed very clearly that women respond to recognition around doing a good job and doing a quality job and achieving outcomes, versus men tend to respond more to financial gains and social status. Women, as a general rule, don't tend to put themselves forward for escalation in a career. They tend to expect to be recognised because they believe they've done a really great job. But the reality is they won't put themselves forward. So as leaders and those mentors, they need to be able to understand and recognise these characteristics in women and change the way they extract that out of females and then encourage them to pursue career escalation.
Thanks, Paula. Amy, Regional Advisor on the Institute of Managers and Leaders, very topical. What are your comments on this?
Look, I think that there's an unconscious bias attached. So to comment on or add to what Paula's pointed out is that I believe there is belief systems and templates that are formed from previous generations, and that then doesn't form the pathway, or it doesn't form the support, it doesn't form the perception, the support, the training that's required to actually support women in leadership. I think that there is a perception about women at a particular age. I know myself as recent as 2019, I was sitting at an interview with a general manager of an organisation for a leadership role, and I was spoken to about my marital status, children if I had any, and the fact that given my age, he would expect that I would then be taking time off to have children again. So that template, that unconscious bias that's attached to the training and the pathway that is in our current leaders and the current generation sitting in those CEOs and those C-suite positions, I think is quite a challenge that we really need to address.
Melissa, you forged a career in a traditionally very blokey workspace. I'm sure you've got legion of stories, but what are your comments on this?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because in the 90s it was just so male dominated. I was one of the only women in the office, and there were some uni grads coming in, but no one really going up the ladder. But then in the last 5 years of being a Caltex franchisee, I saw women rise to the top and really challenge the status quo, and they really formed the map of which that company is today through change.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there's certainly more women coming through. And what will a world with more women leaders look like? What will the benefits be for society when we see more women in those leadership roles? Paula, you've had a lot of experience with government, with business, with community. What do you see?
So I'm actually really curious about your example of the Caltex situation and how Caltex actually saw some benefits out of that. There are some real core benefits that come out of having a balanced management structure with both genders in the top layers and also in management as well. If you were to search the Australian Bureau of Statistics website, they've got a very interesting study there run by the Deakin University that's actually modelled and used a number of different case studies to demonstrate that there is actually an economic impact in having females in leadership positions. And just to give you an idea, if you were to increase our board positions, females in board positions by 10%, you're looking at an economic value to that business increase of 5%. That's equated to $80 million in an ASX business. If you then bring it down to a management layer and you increase females in management positions, the value to the business is $104 million if you increase women by 10 percentile points. If you appoint a female CEO and you increase that percentile by 10%, you then as well can add another $80 million to that ASX company. These are tangible economic benefits by increasing the number of females in senior leadership positions. We've gone through one of the most disruptive years in the history of while I've been alive. I haven't gone through major wars, I haven't gone through famine, but I have now gone through a virus, a pandemic. And what we saw in the last year, and we've been tracking in the last 5 years actually, is that businesses are starting to suffer disruption in much faster, much more volatile ways. And so what we're starting to see as a trend in terms of the leadership characteristics to take us out of COVID and then to reset us for a future with health at the core of every decision we make is what we're calling a human-centric management approach. It's a human-centric workforce that we're looking for. And what does that look like? You're talking about leaders that need to be able to manage people with tragedy. The pandemic has caused a level of tragedy like we have never seen, certainly while I've been alive. So you need leaders that understand and that can manage workforces through human tragedy. We have had to collaborate in ways that we've never been able to before because our borders have been closed, our supply chains have been affected. So our traditional model of working has been turned upside down, and we've had to collaborate through a box because we haven't been able to collaborate like this. And the other thing is we've needed to be able to connect our workforces and show empathy in that connection because we are living through a human tragedy-based environment. And women's characteristics, and the reality is we're the same species, but we are actually two very different beings. We are naturally communicative, empathetic people. And so when you're looking at leadership to take us through COVID and out of COVID, there is a natural, and tell me if you disagree, but female leadership tends to is a natural pathway for businesses where we can apply high levels of empathy, human-centric approach to productivity and profitability. And the studies clearly show that there is economic return around that.
So a world with more women leaders is a world that, where women have greater economic power and where their families have greater economic power. And so what else, though, does a world where women are in equal numbers in leadership roles look like?
Look, all I can do is really add to Paula's comments, and my response and my thoughts around that is that we are more intuitive and often more empathetic, and I speak to business leaders often that refer to women as that a role model in the caretaker environment. If you were to take that model, well, that caretaker environment is now the workplace, and we need to take that really seriously. The emotional connection, the caretaker model, the empathy, the intuition that something's not right and something's not okay, and we need to offer that extra support. That's what the workplace needs right now, as you mentioned, to sort of get out of COVID and to progress. And I think there is a much larger focus on mental health, and I really do think that women leaders have the ability to progress that and to make sure that really pushes through.
What about this idea of a different way to lead, though? Because you're very interested in leadership. You have you're on an advisory board, and I know you've been doing some work or some interesting courses.
Yeah, so I've recently just finished an intentional leadership qualification, and we were lucky to do that through screen during COVID, and it was an interesting concept that we all have worldviews, we all have templates, and I come back to my previous point around that unconscious bias. I come from an environment where, you know, my family, for example, don't come from business world. They're tradespeople, and so my world templates or my unconscious biases might sit in that environment and in that world, and then unconsciously I then drive that into my leadership style or my leadership connection or how I can then connect with my staff. And I think as women and as we're intuitive and as we show that level of empathy, regardless of our worldviews, we have a better ability to be able to connect with what our template is and challenge that. Whereas everybody has templates and everybody has worldviews, and sometimes for others and potentially our male leaders, challenging that template, acknowledging that bias, understanding that an unconscious bias or a template or a worldview actually sits there, can be quite a challenge.
Claire, if I could just add to that, I think it's really important to really state that in a post-COVID environment where resilience is the number one factor required out of businesses, we actually need to build on the strengths of all genders. So we need to actually pick the strengths from females and pick the strengths from males, and every bit that falls in between that. We need to take the strengths of all of those, because we've got some very large scale problems that we now need to solve in a 2022 onwards environment. And it's going to take the strengths of every brain to be able to resolve those, to ensure that we have got longevity environmentally, economically, profit-wise, socially, the whole bit. It's really about picking the strengths and recognising that everybody can bring those strengths to the table and will be needed to do that.
Do you agree?
I totally agree with all of that. I think with more women leaders, we have a more holistic approach. You know, when you have a more balanced work environment, you seem to have a better culture. I know from my experience, less boys clubs, less peer pressure, you know, and it's just about being progressive. I think it's the start of the women sort of movement. We've got the Indigenous Australians, we've got the LGBTQ movement, all those things. I just think it's just the start of it, and it's just creating that holistic approach that fits for everyone.
And is that something that you do in your business?
It's something I intentionally do in my business.
Nice.
When I took the business over 2 years ago, it was all men. It's been very intentional, and we're proud to say now we're 50-50.
In 2 years?
In 2 years, and women are represented in every area of my business, from sales to graphic design to production, installation.
And would you say that your business has changed from a business results perspective because of that?
Correct. In a pandemic right now, and we're growing rapidly.
And how have the men coped?
Pretty well. Every man has a mother or a sister, and it's just sitting down and having one conversation at a time.
It's about the education piece.
It's exactly right.
Better understanding about how to work together.
Yeah. Nice. Barbara, do you want to wrap this one up?
Yeah, look, reflecting on what everyone has said in terms of the value that women add to a company in a financial sense, it's also, as we've said, in an emotional sense. And there was a Fortune 500 study, or a study on Fortune 500 companies, that showed when there was a greater representation of women at board level and through leadership roles, that there was not just a greater financial result, but also there were higher levels of employee engagement. So people who were in organisations that had a higher number of female managers said they had greater job satisfaction. You know, they felt that the organisation cared more about their career development, and there was less burnout. And they also felt they had a greater life-work balance. And the interesting thing was that applied to both the males and the females, but it actually applied even more strongly to the males. So, and I think that we're moving into a time when we've got younger people moving into the workforce, and they're not like Gen Xers. You know, they demand to have work-life balance. You know, they demand to have their emotional and lifestyle needs met. So our more, if you can call it, female version of leadership has a very strong role to play in the future.
Melissa, what actions can women take to improve their leadership skills and be confident in putting their hands up for stretch roles? And what actions can men take to support them?
Well, I think women, a day without learning is time wasted, right? So I think, you know, continuing to learn every day and work with men, and support each other. I'm really about the equality thing. It doesn't really sit with me. That I just think you learn to cohabitate better. And I think learning is there for everyone.
It's all about the balance, Paula?
So building on what Melissa was saying, definitely continue to learn every day, but find the organisation that works for you. Find a purpose and a meaningful role where you can see that your values are in alignment with the organisation's values. And if they don't align, move on to the next one, because there are plenty of businesses that do offer meaningful, purposeful work and that do offer career escalation.
I like to consider it as let's desexualise leadership. You know, let's look at people as individuals based on their skills and their experience, learn from each other, and just get on with it. I quite like to point out and you know, have a 50-50 workforce, understand the benefits of both genders and what those differences bring to the business, and continue to move forward.
Okay. Barbara?
I think women have to have courage. I think we need to have the courage to take more risks, to dare to be different, and to drive this change we're all looking for. You know, very often men feel very comfortable in their right to hold these positions of leadership, but women can tend to suffer from the imposter syndrome sometimes, I think. And we're always trying to prove our value, but we know we've got value. We've spoken about all the values that we add to organisations. And I think one of the great advantages that we have is that no one expects us to be like men in dark suits. You know, we can dare to be different. You know, we can go against the grain, we can break the rules, and we can challenge the established thinking. You mentioned the fact that males and females are very important in organisations, and I think it is true. We don't have to replicate men. We know we have values of our own, and that we should have the confidence and the courage to simply be ourselves.
I think I might know what your one word might be to sum up the actions that we've just spoken about.
Courage?
How did I guess? Amy?
Openness.
Action.
Perseverance.
Perseverance, action, openness, and courage. Thank you very much for all of your thoughtful insights, your contributions, your wise words of wisdom today, and also for the actions that you've shared. Thank you too for the Foundry Co-works for supporting this program, and thank you to our studio audience for coming along today.
Thanks again to all our sponsors, especially our primary sponsor, Women on Boards. We appreciate your support on this very important topic today. Remember to subscribe to the Stronger Than My Excuses YouTube channel so that you don't miss anything. Comment, like, or even leave a question on social media, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. And share with anyone who you think this show might help.
Thank you very much to everybody who's joined us today. A particular thank you to the co-host, Barbara.
Thank you, Claire. And please thank our wonderful host for today, Claire Braund, Founder and Executive Director of Women on Boards. And thanks again to our guests, Amy Osborne, Regional Advisor for the Institute of Managers and Leaders. Thank you. Paula Martin, Regional Director for Business New South Wales Central Coast.
Thank you.
And Melissa Marshall, Business Owner of Sinorama Tuggerah. Thank you all.
I encourage you to watch this space as Stronger Than My Excuses tackle some of the really important issues facing us in this post-pandemic world. Thank you again to our assembled panel, and thank you for the opportunity to bring you this program.